Awesome. Well, thank you. I think it's about time we get started. I am here with author Mark J. Rose. We're at the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society for The Panel Continues. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
So, Mark, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the day in the life of an author. Is this your primary focus? Is writing your...
Well, actually, during the day, I'm a biochemist.
Okay, cool.
And so I work for a research foundation called CHDI. CHDI used to stand for Cure Huntington's Disease Initiative. It doesn't stand for that anymore for legal reasons, but the foundation is concerned with one purpose, and that's curing Huntington's disease,
Okay.
which is a orphan neurological disease.
Yeah.
And so you've heard of Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and so Huntington's disease is the third disease in the neural disease series.
Well, the funny thing is that I only know about Huntington's disease because I'm a big House fan, and in season 3 or 4, one of the main cast has Huntington's disease. So
okay.
she's slowly, losing neurological functions and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
it's a
I've just
it's a
been
horrible
rewatching
disease.
Yeah.
Guthrie's father.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Woody Guthrie. And I was a big fan of Woody Guthrie for a long time, even before I started working, and it was just kind of connected, and I was like, that's right. So, yeah, thank you.
How did you get specifically into studying Huntington's disease?
Well, so I have worked for a series of pharmaceutical companies over my career. I
Yeah.
have a PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry, and so I've worked at Merck, I've worked at Glaxo, I worked at Amgen,
Okay.
and as you know, companies kind of change over the course of time, and they offered me a retirement package.
Yeah.
And I took a retirement, and I had intended that I was going to write full time.
Mhm.
But what I found is that I'm not good at sitting at home for extended periods of time without talking to anybody. You can only say so much to your poodles, right? And so after a couple of weeks of that, I started thinking, I need some outside stimulation, and so I'm going to have to go and find a job.
Yeah.
And I think actually that helps me a lot because getting ideas over the course of the day and being on the cutting edge of science actually has made me think of a lot of different ideas. And so I wound up going back and getting a job. And I found this really cool position. As I said, it's a nonprofit, so no profit motive. It's very well funded. And so we have more money than ideas, and that's a bad way to say that, but that's the only way I can think of. That we look for people that have good ideas, and then we fund them.
Cool. So I'm very curious about what your work there kind of looks like. Are you working with Huntington patients? Are you doing more of the breakdown of the chemical breakdown?
Well, so I'm a basic researcher.
Yeah.
I do something called drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics, and that's studying how the drug gets into your body and then gets to the site of action.
Cool.
And when you read the label on whatever your cold medicine, for instance, and it says take it every 4 hours,
Yeah.
I'm the one who comes up with that.
Okay. And we really should. And the reasoning is all there. So you're looking at different data. How do you come up with a 4-hour, take every 4-hour kind of test?
Oh, well, what we do is we'll test it in humans.
Okay.
We give it to
That's what I
them,
was
and then
wondering.
we'll measure the concentration of the drug that's in circulation. And once it gets below a certain amount, then we know that it's time to give another pill. So it's all based on actually giving it to a human being,
Okay.
and then measuring the drug that's in there.
Yeah, forgive me. I know very little about it, but it's very interesting. So, what are some of the cutting edge things that your company is doing?
Well, so we're on the cutting edge of gene therapy and gene silencing. And so you hear a lot of this. If anybody's has heard of CRISPR-Cas9, for instance, this was a big ethical debate at UCLA. My daughter goes to UCLA,
Cool.
and she said, "Dad, have you ever heard of CRISPR-Cas9?" And I'm like, yeah, we pay for people to do it.
Yeah.
Since Huntington's disease is a genetic disease, the only real way to cure it is to change the genetics.
Right. And that's what CRISPR is trying to do, right?
Yeah, so CRISPR kind of goes in and edits the mistake out.
Yeah.
And Huntington's disease is one particular mistake. We know where it is, but it's in every cell of your body. And so we have to figure out a way to actually modify every cell in your body. And so it's not so easy.
It starts, how does it get to every cell in your body?
Well, so they call it, it's called a monogenic disorder, which means that if you have the gene, you're going to get the disease. Okay, so if one of your parents has Huntington's disease, you have a 50-50 chance of contracting Huntington's. And that means as soon as you find out that you have the gene, you're going to get Huntington's. And so you have to start making plans in your life.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's kind of rough. So have you made progress in hunting down?
Well, I would say that we've made progress. I was just at the Huntington's Disease Society of America conference over the weekend.
Yeah.
So last weekend, and we got a chance to meet some of the patients and tell them about some of the really cool things that are happening. And so we're making incremental advances with gene therapy.
Okay.
And this involves almost directly injecting the therapy, the drug, into the brain.
Okay.
And so we're seeing some positive benefits for something called the use of antisense oligonucleotides.
Okay.
Right? This actually stops the toxicity in Huntington's is caused by your body's manufacture of a specific protein, and this stops the manufacture of that protein at the genetic source.
Can this technology be used for other things? Because it sounds like you're trying to do, obviously life extension on Huntington patients.
Yeah, so there are a lot of diseases are genetic diseases, right? Maybe almost all of them have
the ones that are incurable.
With your genetics. And so yes, it has applicability to every other kind of sickness.
Do you think there will be a way to extend life in humans who do not have a genetic disease? I know that they're hunting to find like a cure for aging. Like that is a disease. Is that possible, or is that science fiction idea?
There are fundamental reasons for aging, and I think that we haven't sorted them all out yet.
Yeah.
But I think that there are incremental advances that we can get to. I think in the Bible they said it's 100. The maximum lifespan I think is 120 years.
I think it got further than that, like 1,000 years back in the old days.
Well, yeah, but at one point the Bible said, okay, everybody's not going to live for 1,000 years anymore. They're going to live for 120 years. And
they cut our
that's kind of our goal, right? And that's when you read about it. And I think that there are certain treatments and certain things, antioxidant treatments, that will extend your life at least to that point. So, but not much more than that.
So you don't think that we can find a cure through genetic alteration or like pharmaceutical?
Not yet.
Can't find a cure for death.
As far as I know, there's nobody working out a genetic cure for AIDS.
Damn it. I know some people are working on aging, but it's kind of out there. So how has all of your work informed your writing?
I don't think it's informed my writing as such for this series. This is the Matt Miller and the Colony series. It's about time travel.
Okay.
But I do write screenplays.
Yeah.
And so some of the ideas of genetics actually are going into a screenplay that I'm working on right now.
Okay, awesome. Well, tell us a bit more about the time travel in this series.
Well, so this is the Matt Miller and the Colony series. It's about a 26-year-old modern-day scientist who gets caught in a reactor accident, and he wakes up in the year 1762 in colonial Virginia.
Yeah.
He wakes up on a horse farm.
Okay.
Doesn't know where or when he is. It takes him a couple days to kind of sort that out. And then his life changes when he meets the beautiful farmer's daughter. And he becomes motivated to maybe stay.
Gotcha. So when you say colonies, my first thought was Mars, but now I see you've gone back to our colonies in the U.S. here. Okay.
You don't want to ask too many of those kinds of questions, right?
Yeah. How do you feel about those, the problems that come up when you're dealing with time travel, such as kill yourself, be your own grandpa, that kind of thing? You just don't deal with the paradoxes.
Well, I'm not going to say you don't deal with them. You have your characters acknowledge them.
Yeah.
And you have your characters sometimes agonize over them.
Yeah.
But you still let your character proceed through his time in history with the idea, and again, one of my characters does rationalize this, it's not his fault that he's in some other time.
I mean, I don't know how it could be.
He might have to be there in order for the timeline to proceed as it's supposed to.
Okay.
Whereas Ben Franklin says in the book, let God sort it out.
So, I'm a big, I am a big time enthusiast, so I of course watch all the time travel movies and time travel shows, and then also to look at kind of the more realistic side of time. Have you come to any conclusions about time, or is this more a device here, and then you set up a story and explore characters?
No, I'm convinced that we don't know all there is to know about time.
I would agree.
I think
we definitely don't know.
We are right on the edge. Our consciousness is right on the edge of detecting time. And there's more to time, and we want to control it. And I think ultimately, and that's why I think that people are so enamored with time travel. And you think they'd get sick of it after a while, right? How long have we been talking about time travel? But people are very enamored with the idea of going back and fixing past mistakes. Or, as humans.
Yeah.
Well, the butterfly effect. But humans also want to prepare for the future.
Okay.
And we, of all creatures on Earth, really are the only ones who understand or feel the threats of the future. We want to prepare for it. We want to be ready for it. We're anxious about it. We go to school because we're worried about the future. We save money because we're worried about the future. The future is something that's omnipresent. And so I think that as humans, we're very interested in it. The whole reason I'm kind of going through this is that there have been, Einstein did theorize with his equations, did theorize the possibility for time travel. And one of his contemporaries, a guy named John Wheeler. Have you ever heard of John Wheeler?
Vaguely, yeah.
He performed something called the delayed choice experiment. And what he showed was that human consciousness actually can affect the passage of time in certain observations. And his particular experiment was that he showed that a photon of light, whether you observe it or not, will travel a different way.
Yeah.
And
depending on if it's been observed.
Yes. And thinking about this, photons actually travel at the speed of light, so they're actually out of the realm of what we understand as normal physics.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
They travel faster than the speed of light. And so one of the cool things that'll melt your mind a bit is that the theory is that when you look at a star at night, it's how many billion light years away.
Yeah.
The photon actually can't leave that star unless you're there to observe it. Okay, and so this is what so if you go back and you look at what he showed, and I think this is because a photon is actually outside the realm of normal time. It travels at the speed of light, and that's different than what we understand normal time travel, not time to be. And so when you look at a star some night, think about the fact that unless you're there to observe it, the photon can't come off the star. It doesn't make intuitive sense.
Yeah, I know.
But nor do Wheeler's experiments, and now it's been reproduced
Yeah.
3 different times by even more and more complicated experiments, by even more and more
right?
better funded universities.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, and wild.
Well, it's cool. And so it goes to, is time travel possible? I think it is. I think it's just a matter.
And nobody's there, it doesn't make any sense.
Well,
if
a movie is playing in a theater and you're not there to watch it,
there's nothing on screen.
Does it happen? Same thing.
Interesting.
Well, even when you're there watching it, the screen is blank half the time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the illusion of motion. Well,
there's something about the presence of human consciousness, I think, that's also involved in things like time. And we still haven't sorted out human consciousness either.
Yeah. So, back to your fiction, how have you used time? And I mean, that's the premise. I was going to say the narrative device is the time travel set up, but do you play around with it more?
I don't play around with it a lot. Okay. I think I used it as a device.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make sure that it was a plausible situation.
Yeah.
I have been fascinated with time travel, not because of the scientific aspects of it. Even as a kid, I was always fascinated with not knowing how things work. And this is where this started. And that we don't know. We do all these things day to day. We use our phones. We turn on the water tap and the water comes out. We have no idea really how the water gets there. We plug things in. Most of us don't, though. That's the point. We don't know how the electricity gets there really. And I was fascinated with, okay, if you were placed someplace where you didn't have all these anemones, would you be able to reproduce any of them? Right? You wouldn't. And so even as a young child, and I remember asking my roommate, my college roommate was the smartest guy I ever met. And I said, Alex, have you ever thought about, he was an engineer.
Yeah.
I was like, he didn't know how an engine worked, really. And he was, again, the smartest guy.
Yeah.
He couldn't reproduce an engine. And I said, what would you contribute? If you found yourself back in colonial times, for instance, would you be able to do anything? Would you have any skills? And again, smartest guy I ever met.
Now.
And you know what he told me?
Yeah.
He said, I bet on sports. And I've been disappointed.
Back to the Future,
and ever since then, I've been, I write him every now and then because we're still in touch. And I say, remember that silly answer you gave me?
Yeah, I still want to know what you could actually build.
So I wanted to take a character and I wanted to put the character in that situation and take a fairly educated guy and see if he could survive if he found himself on a colonial farm.
Well, I don't want to go through any spoilers, but I am very curious if he was able to, is he trying to rebuild things like watches, cars, that kind of thing? Is he attempting to share what he knew, or
well, of course. So at one point he kind of sits down and he realizes that, so he's in love with the beautiful farmer's daughter.
Yeah.
And as far as his skill set is for colonial America, he has no skills that are relevant whatsoever.
Right.
Okay. And so all his kind of modern understanding of things. And so at one point he's working as a laborer.
Yeah.
And he wants to be qualified for the beautiful farmer's daughter, but he doesn't have the qualifications. He doesn't have contacts. He doesn't have the skills. He doesn't have all these things he needs.
Yeah.
And so he does sit down and he starts making a list. How can I contribute?
Yeah.
And so I'll leave that to somebody who wants to read the book.
Okay, yeah.
What kind of things does he think of? And you could probably think of, well, what would I think of if I was trapped on a horse farm in 1762?
Yeah, I'm definitely intrigued. And so you're working currently now on the 3rd book in the series, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Any avid reader would be able to get that, or is it still tentative release date?
Yeah, so it takes a lot longer to actually write a book and edit a book and get a book out. So I'm not sure that I'm ready to.
Okay, fair.
I figure I'm about 90% done for real. It still hasn't gone to the editor yet. Yeah. The editor will eventually look at it and just crash it.
Yeah. Then you'll be at
Look
70%.
at all the holes, and then you'll have to go back in. And so I'm hoping by the end of the year, that'll have third book in the series.
Yeah, I'm interested if you could go into that process a little bit more, like the finished book. Is it just what do you do once you finish? Do you?
Yeah, so it turns out that actually writing the book maybe takes less time than all the things that have to happen afterwards.
Yeah.
Especially editing, you have to work with an editor.
Yeah.
You can't really do it by yourself because what happens is that you become so familiar with the work.
Yeah, you're kind of blind to
you
spelling
fill in.
errors.
And I don't know if you've ever seen that paragraph that they used to, that was passed around on the internet where they had only partial words. And your mind would go in, you only had about half the words there, and sometimes you're missing consonants and vowels, and you really couldn't, and your mind actually fills in missing words and does all these crazy things, and you wind up doing the same thing with your own writing. And so you have to work with an editor, somebody has to read through it, they have to change it, then you make all the changes, then they go back and they have to reread it again. Publishing covers, you have to pick out a cover. So I work with somebody who designs the covers. And so this winds up taking quite a long time.
Yeah. What are some of the pitfalls that you can encounter when you're in this process of like releasing a book? Anything that people can be aware of that can go quite wrong?
I would say that kind of the one thing you learn is that you need a good publicist for your book.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have a good publicist, no one knows that it's there.
Yeah.
And the internet has made it possible now for everything to be published.
Yes.
Okay, and so there's now there's a lot of noise, and you somehow have to raise yourself up out of the noise. I'd say my biggest pitfall right now is social media, because you don't have time to do all these things.
Right.
So you want to be writing, and that seems like that should be the primary purpose. But if you're just writing, nobody is paying any attention to the books.
Yeah.
And writers have to do kind of a lot of that and be involved with websites and Instagram.
Yeah. I'm just kind of thinking, what do writers contribute to society other than entertainment? Is it more because you're saying valuable skills someone could bring back if you were to go into the past? Well, to be a writer, but what is the job of the writer in today's world?
Well, writers advance ideas.
Okay.
Right? And I think sitting down and working through an idea and then reworking through an idea and then working through it again, ultimately what you do is you sharpen the argument that you're going to make. And I think that this idea that people are just naturally talented, and I don't know where that came from. I've never seen it in my life. In every field, you have to hone your skills. You have to hone your argument. You have to practice.
Yeah.
If you're a speaker, if you're a writer, and you do get better at it. My editor will tell you that for sure.
Well, that's good to know because there is the myth going around that, artists are just naturally talented, whereas a scientist would have to actually study some facts and know what they're doing before they perform surgery or give you a drug. But an artist, they're just naturally.
No, I took my son. I took my son to WonderCon.
Yeah.
And we listened to some of the DC Comics people talk about how they made it to where they are. This particular guy was the one who drew Harley Quinn.
Yeah.
And it took him 15 or 20 years of working on comic books and honing his skills to be accepted among the highest people in comics, because that trade is actually, you really have to have a lot of skill to bring Harley Quinn to life on a page. And when you see him do it, you don't understand until you watch him draw, and then you go, oh, I get it. And you think, oh, I must be naturally talented. He'll tell you no way.
Yeah.
And I just loved sitting there with my son because I kept elbowing and I kept saying, see,
Yeah.
Even he had to work hard to be able to get where he is.
Yeah.
I think it's a good lesson.
It is a good lesson. Is your son one of these people who like worries that he's not naturally talented at something, or is he trying to?
Well, so
into the arts?
he's always been naturally talented. So I don't know if you have any artists in your
Okay.
family, or you're an artist.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's always been able to kind of look at your face and draw it, which is kind of the weirdest thing ever to somebody who doesn't have natural art.
Yeah.
But then what happens now is that he starts comparing his art to others.
Right.
And and this idea that he thinks that the guy who draws Harley Quinn, well, he drew her, and then somebody said, "Oh, so great!
Yeah.
Here, no way,
Yeah.
no way." He had to learn the trade. He had to come up through the ranks. Lots of people criticized him along the way, and he'll tell you, "My writing was horrible 10 years ago."
Yeah.
Or my drawing.
Yeah, I think that's just a great lesson, but one that artists have really trouble accepting because you never want to think that you can be better with time. I think that's also like short-sightedness of people that you never allow that in the future you're not going to be right here in the same place where you are. So, thank you for that.
It's definitely a skill. Writing is a skill you get better at. And
Yeah.
I was a good scientific writer. So I published a lot of scientific papers. That didn't really prepare me for fiction.
Yeah.
And so it took me quite a long time to get to a point where I'm happy with what I'm writing.
What were some of the difficulties between writing, more scientifically based articles, peer-reviewed journals, I'm guessing, that kind of thing, to what did you find was the difference?
I think that, well, scientific writing is fairly boring.
Okay.
And so, it really is a different kind of writing. It's now it's dealing with human emotion.
Yeah.
Okay, and then it's also dealing with things like conversation.
Yeah.
And then day-to-day conversation isn't the same as writing conversation.
Yeah.
And then there's also dealing with something called subtext. You don't actually say everything in a sentence.
Yeah.
When somebody says something you don't agree with, you go, "Ugh." You don't go, "Well, I don't agree with that, and here's why." What you do is you have some sort of reaction, and then you go right into the explanation, right? And that's an automatic thing. As soon as you start explaining something different to somebody, that's the same thing as saying, "I don't agree with you," passionately.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to kind of get used to that. And that's kind of why I started writing screenplays.
Yeah.
To try to get the conversation more appropriate to the book, more appropriate to the way that people really talk.
So the differences between a book and a screenplay, you're saying, is more dialogue.
For
like
sure.
in the
There's much more subtext, actually. And so the biggest criticism that I got from people when I went to pitch my screenplays is that they were too much like a novel. People don't want to have everything described.
Yeah.
And this isn't just writing screenplays, it's also kind of working with the people that are going to produce the screenplay. They don't want to tell you oftentimes, or they don't want you to tell them how the shot's going to look. So the director wants to make up that shot.
Yeah.
He has better ideas. And that's one of the things that I had to learn. But screenplay writing really does teach you conversation. And the idea with a screenplay and conversation in general is that you should be able to actually black out, I guess delete. You should be actually able to delete the character names, and you should know, just by the way the sentence is constructed, which character is speaking.
Very difficult thing to do, yes. Are there any tricks that you've learned while writing either screenplays or novels, like a setup that generally works, or you've learned conflict that's necessary, something that helps writing?
Well, your characters have to go places. That's one thing, so character development. But one of the things that I had to accept was that we have something in Western society called the archetype. Okay, and the archetype is actually how we interpret the world. And I thought maybe, I'm sure you've heard of the hero's journey, right? And when I first started writing stories and screenplays, I thought, well, you know, who wants to keep hearing the same hero's journey all the time? You know, you want to do something different. But the way that we interpret the world is through, oftentimes, the hero's journey. That's success in our society. You know, it's when you have the dragon, whatever, you know, that's a metaphor for, right? You have the dragon, you slay the dragon, you get the reward.
Yeah.
We live this story every day, and we want to see it happen in movies. We want to see it happen in books. And only the most skillful people can step outside the archetype, right? Somebody like Quentin Tarantino, he sometimes steps outside and does some kind of odd, piece together kinds of things. Don't try that at home.
It'll be definitely bloody if you try to Tarantino something at home.
Yes.
You'll be all lost. Good advice. Yeah, I've heard that there are only 7 stories or so recycled. Do you?
Yes, and that's not the same thing as recycling the same Marvel story over and over again. Which can get
right. There's only one Marvel
really irritating. You can use the archetypes, and you can use them to help people dream and hope through your story and bring them in.
Yeah.
If you don't use these interpretations, you're going to have a rough time.
Yeah, I found myself drawn to more passive characters, like example Katniss in the Hunger Games. I think is a very, very difficult character to do because she's never taking action, but she's still the hero of the story. She's always being put in a situation where she just has to respond, but never actively sought out the situation. And creating characters like that, definitely a much more difficult thing to do, and something we're not as used to is when you're going out and doing a journey and then screwing up and then moving forward and then slay the dragon and then lose the woman and then get her back. And
well, so I think the first Hunger Games book, is brilliant.
Yeah,
that was something that when I read the first Hunger Games book, I was jealous.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's an obvious thing. What it itself. I mean, I'm saying the obvious, but still, you know, there's a few books where maybe I'm not so jealous. But, and I won't say them. But
I'll be fair.
But The Hunger Games is a brilliant book. It's a book that you don't set down. And I also think the first Hunger Games movie, some of the shots in the first Hunger Games movie is also a very brilliantly directed.
Yeah,
as far as I'm
concerned as well. Big fan, but so what are some of your influences? Who are some of your influences in writing or people you love today?
Well, so a lot, I guess. Lifelong passion with Frank Herbert, Dune.
Oh, yeah.
So at an early age, I sat and I think I found a copy of Dune someplace, and I sat down and I started reading it, and so Frank Herbert has been a passion. And also his son, actually, is Brian Herbert, actually wrote some good follow-on books. And then some of the classics, I think Ray Bradbury taught me what science fiction was.
Yeah.
Especially Ray Bradbury short stories. You know, this idea that science fiction really isn't about science at all.
Yeah.
Science fiction is just a vehicle for exploring humanity.
Yeah.
And he taught me that many times over. I'm a big Hemingway fan, and so if I can get my writing to be more like Hemingway, that's my goal.
Think a lot and don't say much.
Which is tough. Well, no, he says so much.
In so little is what I mean. Yeah, short sentences.
Yeah, with very few words.
Yeah, he does.
And then some of those books I didn't like. Moby Dick. I'm thinking back to the books that had a lot to do with Moby Dick. I'm not even sure I ever got through Moby Dick. Right.
Very long, many whales.
Not that one. But Call of the Wild, Jack London.
Yeah.
So I've always been a big dog fan. So every one of my books has a dog.
Okay.
Somehow.
Yeah, you said you have poodles.
Standard poodles.
Okay. Yeah.
And then really another passion ever since college has been Douglas Adams.
Yeah.
And so I like to put, whenever there's some humor in my books, usually I've stolen it a little bit
from
Douglas
yeah.
Adams, or that kind of humor.
We're big fans of Douglas Adams here. Our Lost Con 2 years ago was Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's
3 years, number 42.
3 years, number 42, of course.
Yeah. And so the BBC radio play actually has really been my passion, because that's the, and I didn't know actually, I don't know if you knew this or not, but the radio play was written first, and then the books.
No, I didn't know that.
The books were written from the radio play. So Douglas Adams, at least for the first two series, Douglas Adams was writing the episodes week to week.
Yeah.
And so he was writing that story, in between.
That's crazy.
Actually, production.
Yeah.
That's what Tucker's got. Brilliant stuff. If you get a copy of it or you haven't heard it, BBC production of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, I'll have to listen to it. I've only read it and
It's
seen some
wonderful.
interpretations.
I remember where I was when I heard it the first time. It was on the radio.
Yeah.
It's back when they used to do radio plays.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I was just thinking, you were saying that you've learned that science fiction isn't always about science, but it's about humans. And I was wondering if you can say that about science sometimes.
No, I would say that's not.
It doesn't work.
That's not often the case.
It's not often about humans.
No, and that's why we have to be careful with science, right? Because science isn't the same thing as humanity / morality / ethics. So scientists
Go
tend
into that
to.
more,
So what did I read? I read a story about a Russian scientist, and his task was to combine, and so he was in biological warfare, and his mission was to combine the most powerful viruses as the best possible weapon. So he was working with it wasn't Ebola, it was something else, but smallpox and something that was really highly contagious.
Yeah.
And as far as he was concerned, when he came up with this hybrid virus that was the most excellent biological weapon you could ever come up with, he was a success.
Yeah.
And so science oftentimes, and we kind of get caught up at not every scientist, and I'm not speaking for every scientist, but we have to be careful. We have to be careful because scientists want to learn about things. They want to see if the next genetic advancement will change the evolution of humanity. That's kind of their curiosity.
Yeah.
And so I think that science can't live alone by itself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point I want to make.
And there's not a moral core, is what you're saying.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
It depends on the
We
person
just have to be
using their
careful.
own morality.
Yes.
But when you're looking just at science itself, it's to understand the world.
I think we need to always be checking each other.
Okay.
And making sure we're on the right course.
Yeah.
Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. Right.
So what are some scenarios where we could wipe out all humans other than, we just said, the fatal diseases?
Well, so the coolest thing that I learned, I worked, when I was at Amgen, I worked with an immunologist.
Yeah.
And I've been kind of obsessed with the fact that, why aren't we going to a more perfect species? Why is there so much disease?
Yeah.
Why are people still getting sick after all this time? Evolution is supposed to fix this for us.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be getting better and better and better.
Yeah.
And I said, we should probably start working on something like that, right? Because we want to take the best of everything. And if we can modify, we could get people, maybe their vision will always be perfect, right? Their hearing, they'll never go deaf. And the immunologist had a good point. He said, oh no, we don't want to become the same.
Yeah.
He said, because the first flu virus, the one where it kills, every year, some 40,000 people or something die in the United States, die from the flu.
Yeah.
And it's all over the country, but they're susceptible to that strain for some reason.
Yeah.
And he said, if we're all genetically the same, what happens when the right flu virus comes along,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't have this variability. Because the only thing that keeps the flu virus from making everybody sick, everybody die, is we all have a little bit of a difference in our genetics based on mutations.
Yeah.
And so
it's kind of a better world.
Well, not really, but really, right? It's this thing. It's
the
this trade-off. The only way we survive is through all the mistakes.
Yeah.
And so we want to be careful about modifying our genetics and making ourselves. We all don't want to be as tall as Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
We all don't want to be as good-looking as Brad Pitt. We want to be careful of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're all the same,
yeah.
Suddenly we're actually a weaker species.
Yeah.
And that's a contradiction.
Crazy. Well, I'm going to open it up to questions, Marty.
Yeah, you mentioned something about all of those out there. Really a lot of, the net's come up with a lot of self-published stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something that a lot of these people don't understand, and I think it's a strong point. Editing is a different skill than writing. You've done editing. You can help things much better than you can do anything yourself.
Yeah.
The writer who really pointed that out by example was Heinlein.
Yeah.
He finally decided he was so good he didn't need an editor. Then stuff became totally unreadable to a lot of people who like those previews.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you for highlighting that point. An editor is a very essential part to a writer.
I've learned to appreciate other people's perspective, and I'm not saying that I do it all the time. It doesn't work every time.
Yeah.
Right. I kind of, you still have to kind of insist sometimes, though, and move forward. You don't want your writing to become your editor's writing. But my idea, I had this idea, I'm like, well, no one actually stood behind Picasso and said, critiqued his art as he was doing it. And so there's still a little bit of that, right? And he didn't give it to someone and someone said, I think that change this, change that. He'd have been like, are you kidding me? Right? It would never would have happened. But so you have to meet your editor halfway.
Yeah, a good editor also will understand what a writer is doing and work with it.
Right.
But it really is a different skill, and almost all writers really need them unless they happen to have an editing skill.
No, I think
I think you need another
I'm sure everybody
perspective.
needs.
Yeah.
Very few people can get by without an editor.
Yeah.
So.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Something I haven't picked up, talking to both academics and people who are writing and whatnot. A lot of people these days talk about dichotomize between artists and equestrians, or artists and scientists. And it's really kind of thinking about it as, right brain creativity versus people who are very logical and very, abstract. But I think most people these days are neither. I think most people are emotional, and they don't care how scientific or how creative it is, so long as the media is stimulating, interesting, provocative, and that's what people are looking for.
So are people more looking for emotional core than logical or creative innovation?
I have to say I can't. I don't know.
How important is
but
emotion?
I think you're.
People like the action of it. They don't necessarily like the kind of logic or morals. They don't necessarily like the imagination. They just want to see the movement or the entertainment factor.
What do you think about that?
What is entertainment factor? I think we do operate somewhere in this place between order and chaos.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that your left brain, that's the one that deals kind of with the unknown and the chaos, and then your right brain. No, I got it wrong. It's your right brain that's the creative part, and it's your left brain that's it places boundaries, right? And I see people that are more so one way than the other. And I think it's actually you operating back and forth between those that people enjoy. That they do want they want to see people bringing order to chaos. And I think about this I'm a big basketball fan, and how is that art? how is basketball art? It's bringing order to chaos. It's taking a basketball, it's taking nothing and putting the ball in the hoop.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's ordered. And a guy named Allen Iverson, who was a Philadelphia 76er, who was not the kind of guy that you would expect to talk about ethereal kinds of things.
Yeah.
But he would say that there would be certain times during his game when the basketball hoop would be this big in his mind. And he said it only happened every now and then.
Yeah.
But he said that he was accessing. This is Allen. If you've seen Allen Iverson, I mean, he was from the. He was arrested a couple times when he was at university, right? He wasn't the kind of guy who talked about, the edge of chaos, the kind of guy that talked about art.
Yeah.
But he would describe this different state of being that he would be in, and I was sure that he was definitely going into the right brain. And that's when he was an artist.
Yeah.
And he was bringing order. He was always putting the ball, and you can, a sports analogy, touchdown pass, but my son, who is a natural artist,
yeah.
He looks at a paper and he suddenly draws something. He takes nothing and he makes it into order.
Yeah.
But he can access that little piece that I can't. I can't.
Cool. Yeah, Joe.
Yeah. Earlier, so you were talking about looking towards a more perfect world. Possibly something that should be for the science fiction. But how do you decide what would make the world more perfect? How do you get enough people to agree with your definition for it to be most working?
No, I don't think I believe in. I think that, to me, a more perfect world is less and less human suffering, right? Will we ever work to a perfect world? I don't believe in that for human beings, because everybody has. I think you're right. It's a different definition for a more perfect world. I get very agitated when people start talking about the human utopia, because I know we'll all be miserable in the human utopia. The last thing that we want to do is lay back and have someone feed us grapes. And ultimately what would happen in the human utopia is people would walk around and start kicking out the supports just to have something interesting to do.
Yeah.
And so I think we probably agree more about that. What I was talking about is making a more perfect human, because what we want to do is we want to cure disease, but what we were talking about is that you can actually go too far with making a perfect human, because now you're susceptible to the first pathogen that likes your genotype.
Yeah. Well, I think we have time for one more question. Eli?
My other one was also kind of comment on when it comes to the kind of utopian whatnot, I don't think people overall in society want to find ends to stuff where people, there's kind of the notion that there's no victory without sacrifice. I think people like suffering and conflict and driving forces. Like you said, the world was perfect and life was extremely easy. It would get boring really quickly. It was meaningless,
Yes.
But I think there has to be some kind of pain and conflict that drives the story. And that's like a whole point. But there has to be like a kind of encouraging.
So I'm going to turn it into a question. So how come heaven is so appealing to most people?
I think heaven is something you have to work for, right? That's why it's appealing. It's
you get to work for it
the
in
end
this
goal.
life. Yeah.
And I think that
That's very interesting.
happiness is a byproduct of working towards a noble goal. And I always think of this stuff in terms of my son and my kids.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I have 2 daughters and a son.
Yeah.
And him more so, because my daughters are focused and they're ambitious and they're moving forward.
Yeah.
You never know what's going to happen with him because he's an artist.
Uh-huh.
And I've thought about this, and my wife has said, well, I just want him to be happy. And I don't think we want him to be happy. We want him to be pursuing a noble goal. We want them to be doing something, working towards something.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe happiness will come as a byproduct, and always does. You know, every time we reach a goal, we're happy for this much time.
Yeah.
And then we're off to something new. So, yeah, I think that happiness isn't the end game. I think working towards a goal is the end game.
Well, thank you. That is very insightful. Thank you. We're going to wrap it up. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And if you guys want to check out his book, he is here, has copies, and you can also go check him out on Amazon. There are flyers,
Amazon,
that kind of thing.
Kindle. I don't know.
Yeah, please take a look. Thank you. All right.